Hey everybody, it's Rajesh here.
And Tane here.
Welcome to our podcast, Baskets of Knowledge, Chats with a Difference. In our podcast, we invite guests from around the country and around the world to talk about how they got to where they're at the moment. It's about a journey, it's about an experience, it's about their life.
Good to everybody. Welcome back to a very special podcast episode. This is episode number 50. If you had asked us this 1 year ago, we'd probably be like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" Tane, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's crazy to think we got to 50. I feel like, yesterday that we were on 20, let alone, still trying to get a few listeners, but here we are.
Yeah, awesome, cool. And I'm going to ask you a question, not about what you've learned in the last week or so, but what have you learned since we started the podcast, which was about a year ago?
Oh, what a tough question.
Yeah.
I guess I've just learnt how vast the stories and experiences are. You know, we often think about our journey and how our journey is the only journey, but being able to talk to different guests every week and realize that, hey, there's been people out there that have struggled a lot more than, the struggles that we've gone through in our own journeys. And I think that's made me appreciate my journey a lot more as well.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because I think one of my biggest learnings was actually getting to listen to the stories and giving them and allowing us to listen to them, and them giving us space and the privilege of telling their story. And I guess, like you said before, everyone has a facade, and behind the facade there's a whole lot of stories going on, which is really, the learning is everybody's got a story. That's my biggest learning. And to talk about that, and it's a great way to introduce our 50th podcast guest is a person who, well, basically this wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for his advice at the start with Tane, and lending us his mic at the start. This would have just been a very, very different story altogether. And we are very privileged and honored to welcome Troy to our podcast. Thank you, Troy, for being our 50th guest.
It's a privilege, and 50 is a huge milestone. Like for any podcast, I remember when we started 3 years ago now, I was like, if we get 10, I'd be so stoked, because like the amount of work that actually goes into planning to talk, and especially with a co-host and just your lives that go on. But like 50 to get through, it's a feat nonetheless. So I'm very, very honored to be here as that guest.
No, thank you very much. Like I said before, it wouldn't have started without your advice right at the start. So we really appreciate that. And before we get into your story, do you want to tell our listeners about who you are? Who is Troy? What is Troy doing at the moment?
Man, okay, this would be one of those like really broad brush, just like silly answers, and then you'll be like, you said this. But so basically, I'm like you said, I'm the host of the Sick Ass podcast, which we'll probably get into shortly. I'm also a research fellow, so my research interests are in just Pacific Islands health in general, but mostly looking at this year, looking at education. So what parental education will do for children's health in the future, so for their children's health, and at the same time, just trying to be like the best community member that I can to various communities of practice, either on the sports fields, playing rugby, or being a researcher within my institution, but also being a community member with our Cook Islands community down here, and then just trying to spread stories like you guys are with my podcast that we have, and just anything that kind of comes up that interests me. I guess that's a bit of me.
Awesome. What a great way to start. Like you said before, it's a very broad brush approach, but there's so much depth there. Before we even talk about any of those things, I'd like to ask you the first question is, where is home for you? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so so there's like multiple here. So I could, like Wellington, I consider home still, even though I have been in Dunedin for 10 years now. So I came down in 2013. Yeah, so about 10 years. And then I also have spent a lot of time in the Cook Islands as well. So my mum, we're from the island called Mauke. Mauke is one of the southern group islands of the 15 in the Cook Islands, which it's one of my favorites. And then so my mum now lives in Rarotonga, which is the main. So if you talk about the Cook Islands, that's the capital island of the Cook Islands, I guess. So my mum lives there now, and that's where I spend a lot of time, and that's where I spent a bit of my time for my PhD as well. So home, I guess, would be between those two. So Wellington and back in the Cook Islands. Just they're the ones that when you go back are so effortless. Like you don't feel like you have to do anything to feel like you're back. Like it's just you're there, and it was like you were there just yesterday. Whereas still coming to Dunedin, even though I've been here for 10 years, it still feels like I have to settle back in again. But those are the two that when I go back, it's just we're back in.
Yeah, it's so crazy. I like to ask the question because I have the same quandary. People say, "Where's home for me?" I've been in New Zealand for 19 years, I think, but I grew up in Africa, and I've been in New Zealand for a long time. But where is home for me? I really find that a struggle to answer.
Yeah.
But like you said, when you go back to your home, which to me is Zimbabwe, I'm like, this is just like normal. Even though things have changed around you, it's still like going back home. And Tana, I guess you feel the same. But I mean, you've only been away for 3 years, I guess, but you get to a stage where you start questioning where home actually is.
Oh, for sure. And especially, because parents are still back in Taranaki. But yeah, I think having a new family in the sense of the word here makes it a struggle every time I go home. Yeah.
Awesome. And so, Troy, we're going to go back to your start. So your origin story. So you started off in Wellington, and then what made you choose to come down? I mean, from the Cook Islands, sunshine galore, Wellington weather. Okay, we'll talk about that there. And then you choose to come down to Dunedin to do your study. What made you choose that as a destination?
Sure. So, well, I guess Wellington in general. So, like we come from Porirua, in the heart of Wellington. So, I guess it's a Pacific hotspot. It never was quite. I think it was more like Auckland. People will think Auckland, but now, like as we start to see the migration patterns and then people like more Pacific people coming down south. But Porirua, like, was the central part in Wellington where we ended up. But then coming here was I wanted to do PE. I knew I wanted to do PE. Like I've said this before, but I had a PE teacher who, instead of doing what they were doing, I wanted to be like him. So like actually like him rather than what his profession was. But being a PE teacher was also part of his profession. And at the time, back in about 2012, like it was a no-brainer. If you're going to do PE, there's a PE school at the University of Otago. And without thinking about anything, without having been to Dunedin, without actually knowing that, like how this whole university structure works, I just knew that's where I was going to go. And then I knew that I just needed to put some steps in place to get there. So it was a very like, they do PE there? Oh yeah, sweet. That's where I'm going. I didn't think of anything else. And then after that, I got the entrance scholarship. And then I was like, oh, well, that's a no-brainer then. I've got that. So that's going to make it as easy as possible. I didn't think like anything about, I'm moving so far away. Anything like that. I was just like, Otago. Yeah, okay, cool.
Oh, brilliant. And were you the first in family to go to university, or were you following a tradition of other people in your family?
Yeah, so my dad kind of did. He did teachers college, but like his was a really long journey. He did the 3-year, I think it was the 3-year BEd at Vic, and then but that was like a really long time. That so pretty much my childhood from like 8 years old till 12 or 13, 14, like he was slowly slugging away at that as a single father raising us. So it became normal to be around tertiary institutions. Not that like he was researching or anything like that, but we were just like hanging out at the university because we had to wait for him to finish. So university for me, I was just like, oh, that's just what people do. So I was very privileged to have had that, even though I saw the hard part of like him actually having to slug through it. I was like, oh well, yeah, I think everyone goes to university, isn't that right?
Yeah, it's that crazy. And then now when you reflect on that and you're now in your space where you're at the moment, how does that make you feel? Because actually university is not something that a lot of people think, especially from your community.
Yeah,
when you go back
yeah. No, it's weird. It's very weird, and it makes me appreciate my environment that I was given. Like it's always one of those things that I think when you reflect, you start to notice that like, wow, you were so privileged to have like all the experiences that you had, the exposure to different things. But like, yeah, now that you see, I think you come through it and you're less naive and you're less like kind of, naive to the fact that this is a very privileged place to be and only some people get to do it. Then that kind of gave me more drive because I think I noticed it in my first or second year where like, oh, not everyone comes here. And then that's what made me feel like, okay, I either belong here or I don't, or I can keep going and make it a space where other people who are like me can belong. So that actually ended up being a drive.
Yeah, awesome. And I guess that is a fantastic segue to your research at the moment with educating parents. How do you find that with that research that you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you can look like we use big data. So I don't know if you're like, big data has so many limitations in itself, but what we can do is we can look at kind of trends and we look at, if you have more educated parents, what does that actually mean for the health of the children that they have? So in Pacific families, and like you do see that. So some of the work that we have been doing, just looking at different health outcomes, and there's a clear there's almost a clear or sometimes controversial, like you're not sure whether it goes up or down, but education has so many factors that are going to change different variables. So like your socioeconomic status or maybe even your health literacy. So your health outcome is actually going to be better. So I'm not going to say it's increasing, because if you say increasing, could mean the opposite. But anyway, you have better health in general if your parents have greater education. That's for a whole host of factors. But when you do look at it, you start to see that there's something else at play. So yes, we can get people more educated, but that doesn't mean that the inequity or the disparity between non-Māori, non-Pacific and Pacific actually gets even. So now you start to see, oh, there's something else at play. This is a systemic thing, or is there something like that? So yeah, I mean, it's the eye-opening stuff, but at the same time, you have to start somewhere to be able to unleash that sort of stuff. Yeah.
And I guess that's like everything in life, you know what you have to do, but why aren't we doing it? You have to exercise, you don't need to, but why don't we do it? And we know that education, I mean, everybody knows education is good, but what's the barrier? So what is the barrier for that to happen? And one of the perceptions as well around education, especially living in a country where we're such a diverse community, we're Māori, Pacifica, we have such a diverse Asian community. It's so crazy where education takes on a whole different meaning in different societies.
Absolutely.
And again, you look at Western education versus, say, Maori education. I go to lots of kuras, and they say to me, "Hey, the science we teach here is based on our traditional science, and taking that to the Pakeha world, that doesn't work." So there's a bit of a conflict right there, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's very interesting. So I look forward to seeing what that research brings up for everybody.
Yeah.
No pressure. So and then you come to Otago, you're doing your PE school, and then the idea of postgrad and PhD, was that something that just popped up with you, or did you have an opportunity, or did you ever think you'd be doing a PhD? I guess.
Oh yeah. So it was one of those things where I just needed to get to uni to see what that was actually going to be like. But I remember telling my parents, telling my mum, because my mum never had a formal education past high school, and telling my dad, because seeing how hard it was for him, and I was just like, oh well, yeah, I guess this is something that we could do. But I was always said that I was just going to do my master's. I said, that's my goal, I want to do my master's. And I think it was because that was one step above anything that I had known at that point. Yep. And then coming down, you start doing stuff, you start seeing oh, actually I can have a good go at this. Because I had my dream was I just wanted to be a PE teacher, and that was because I didn't do any sciences at high school. I didn't do anything to see you can be anything beyond a PE teacher. All I knew about PE was that you become a teacher, and I think that was the classic thing: you be a PT or you become a teacher. And then when I got down here, I did hubs, and that was the one paper that everyone was telling me oh, you haven't had a science background, it's going to be tough for you. Ended up getting an A. And I was just I love this stuff. This is awesome. I was actually learning it. And then I continued learning it after. And I was like, what can I actually do to learn more about this stuff? So I got into exercise physiology. And then past that point, I was like, hold on, this stuff leads to health. That's why you do exercise. And that's why this can make that better. And then I was just like, this is the way to go. If we keep doing this and keep getting people more active, there's potentially some sort of life-saving factors in here. And because I work in my community and I do all this stuff anyway, this can actually provide the scientific background for a lot of stuff that we do. And then I just had really supportive people. I had Te Koronga, so the Māori Indigenous research team. They pretty much let me do a lot of stuff with communities. And that was the work. I think, I had really, really cool stuff in terms of the papers that I was doing. I was learning a lot theoretically, but then actually being able to go in and do stuff with communities was where I was just like, is there a way where you can actually do this stuff, but also implement that other stuff? And then they said, well, if you do postgrad, this is where you can actually answer those questions. So I was just like, well, sign me up for that. So yeah.
Crazy. And it's so crazy how that happens, along the journey. And Tana, you're at this point in your life right now with your third year.
Yeah, I think, as you say, Troy, you always think of, we're just going to get our degree and then seeing the next level above it, which for me is going to be honours, hopefully next year. But yeah, you never know where the journey's going to end. And, when I started, I never thought that postgrad would ever be an option, but here we are.
Yeah, I think that having some sort of being open-minded to that sort of thing as well. I think, you come down here, especially if you're leaving home and coming here, and there are some families, and I know I've experienced it, where you can only be away for so long. Like, it's such a huge commitment or a huge sacrifice for people to come down here to start with. So doing the minimum, so just like I can only do 3 years, and then I need to go back home. So like maybe that next step is more of a sacrifice that you have to take to be away from your family longer. But at the same time, like having having that option and actually being aware of that option, I think that's still not something that, like, getting to uni now is like, that's huge in itself. So hopefully soon, like we said, if we just keep getting more like people rolling into it, then like, okay, the extra year, that extra 2 years is going to be something like, okay, that's what we're going to do. And then we'll have more people going into that postgrad year.
Yeah, and I think it's a shift of mindset as well. And this is a question I'd love to ask you, because I work in the space with young people, and I was speaking to one young person yesterday, and they were talking about, oh, I can't be at university longer than 3 years because there's debt. And in my mind, I was like, oh, I don't know, that's a negative way to think about it. What are your thoughts about that? The whole student loan thing and debt.
Yeah.
And
but like, I think it's all about leveraging your advantages.
Yeah.
So if you, like, you're going to get that, but like anything, if you invest in something, there's going to be some sort of risk with it. And then, but like, maybe we're not told that because maybe we've never dealt with that amount of money before. I remember the first time I had to do a budget sheet, and I was like, yeah, that's probably like $500. And they're just like, all right, so we're going to put 15 grand towards that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never conceptualized that before. Yeah. And then when you start to think like, oh, it's going to be $30,000 to do this, you're just like, holy crap, like, I'm never going to be able to buy a house, because like, that's a huge amount of money. And I think it's like where we are at those different points of our lives, but also not understanding that when you do get this is what can lead you to a job which gets you paid more, which in the long term is going to be. And I think long-term thinking is something that's still quite difficult for a lot of people. I run into that with behavioral change. People saying, okay, I want to do this. Do you reckon in 2 weeks I'll be like sprinting? And I'm like, this is more like a 6-month journey. And then they're just, oh, that's too long. I can't do that. I got to go find something else. So I think it's definitely understanding timeframes, understanding the length that things take in terms of like having to work towards that time, and then being able to conceptualize what that actually is realistically, rather than just like the huge magnitude at the one time.
Yeah, totally. And I think, that's the law of the compounding effect. You do one thing a day and things will change. But humans we're just greedy for things to happen straight away. We're like, it's got to be today, or otherwise I'm not doing it. And that's and like you said, with behavior change, healthy diets, going to the gym and things like that. It's, if I've taken one pill or done one workout, that's it. I'm not healthy. Bring it on. Doesn't work like that thing. And you must see that across both of you must see that across the young people and the people that you meet. And then you have this opportunity to do a PhD. How did that feel? Because I mean, when you get offered the PhD offer, it's quite a amazing moment, because not everybody gets to that stage where you are actually offered a spot in a PhD program.
Yeah, for sure. So I was finishing my honors, and my honors was really cool. I really enjoyed my honors year. It was looking at Pacific research methodologies and models of health, and how that can be applied into the physical activity setting. So how you could develop a model where you can like be culturally sensitive in terms of Pacific communities, but then also making sure that you are, the scientific side of everything. You're keeping people safe in terms of their physiology, anatomy, and everything like that. So I got to combine my two worlds of understanding science from like a Western perspective, but then also cultural obligation and community. And then after that, there's the HRC. So I always shout out Health Research Council, because they helped me through my summer studentship, and then they ended up, funding my full PhD application. Oh, wow. And my difference is I put that application together with an idea of stuff that I'd already been doing, and it was like all from me. Whereas most people who would go in, they would like have an idea, and then their supervisor would say, we've got these ideas, which one would you like to do? But I was very stubborn, and I've always been stubborn. We're like, no, this is what we need to do. And there was a lot of question around it, like, okay, but it doesn't have this, it doesn't have that. And I'm like, don't worry, it's this is going to work. And I just had this faith in myself. And my supervisor, as soon as they got on board, like I started having more and more belief that this is going to be good. And then you put it in, and if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But then, you get the email, we're good to go, fully funded for 3 years, have a crack. And I was like 23 at the time when I got that. So I was just like, okay, cool. I've got stability for the next 3 years. I wasn't like you get that, and it's such a huge relief that you've got the funding, but then you realize, oh no, now I've got 3 years that I actually have to put this idea into work. So I was just really excited about the whole thing, but at the same time, I just saw it as a huge opportunity to be able to change the narrative, I guess, around what is considered scientific.
Awesome. And that's such, and I mean, the awesome thing there is that you had belief in yourself. And sometimes, human nature, we don't believe in ourselves. We require, others to say, hey, this is all good, or permission for others to say this is all good, or we require other acknowledgement. But we spoke about all the positive stuff, which is awesome. But what are the challenges? So you're confident, you're positive, but the PhD journey, or actually the research journey, is not all hunky dory. It's a roller coaster. Yeah. So what are some of the challenges that you faced when you, I guess, at any stage?
Yeah. Well, the first is not seeing anyone like you. So like I came to uni as an 18-year-old with a full sleeve and leg tattoos. And, I was just always pinholed as like, oh, you're a footy player. It's like, are you just focusing on footy? But like, I actually really enjoyed university. Yeah. And then a lot of other stuff is like just feeling like, so my ideas, for example, of what I wanted to do and what was the right thing to do, were challenged a lot. There's just like, yeah, but like this introduces a bias, this introduces like this sort of thing. And in terms of like keeping the scientific rigor of different things, that was the difficult part. I think more the intellectual stuff of everything was like very difficult, but also then celebrated when it went well. So I was just like, I would hate to see what it looked like if it didn't go well, because like I am on the positive side of everything now. I guess my reflection now looking back is like, yeah, it went really well. But at the time, it was difficult to try sell an idea, to try be like, this will work, because it hadn't been done before, and it hadn't been done before in the world. So I became the leading expert in working with these different communities using physical activity. So that was difficult, trying to sell it, because in your heart, you've had the right consultation, you've had the right people back you, but the people who actually fund it, the people who give you the okay, who give you the grant to actually, or the ethics to even go and do this, like, we approve your research to go forward. They are people who don't have that same extent, or that knowledge, or that cultural knowledge or competency that you have, or that your community has actually granted you. So that was difficult, because I knew that culturally this is what we need to do, but I need to write this in a way where it will be acceptable for the people who are going to pretty much oversee the entire thing. But like I said, every challenge that I had, being able to get through it was then like, oh, cool, we can actually game this. Like, this is part of the game. We just have to use these words and use these phrases to still reflect what we need to do. But then at the same time, we can still fulfill the obligations that we have contractually. So that was a huge struggle. Another struggle, I guess, was going through it and feeling very alone. There were two types of alone that I felt. There was physically alone, because like I was my supervisor's only PhD student, only postgrad student, I think, at the time. And in terms of the postgrad projects that were going on, they're like different labs of where we are. And those lab groups are so tight. They're going out like every week and having morning tea, and then someone's birthday comes up and they go out for birthday drinks, and you're just like, that looks fun. I would really enjoy being part of something like that. Because it's cool in undergrad. You're going to different classes, you all meet your classmates. There's at least 30 of you, and you're all working through the same stuff. But like intellectually, then this is the next part, is intellectually I was very alone, because I had no one to go back and forth with the ideas that I had. And you can go crazy. You can I talk to myself anyway, but you end up finding solace in your own thoughts by talking to yourself, who's then going more crazy. So your thoughts become more and more crazy. And then you start saying, and then you spiral into this, like, maybe this isn't even a good idea. So that cycle happens over and over again. And you're lucky if you get out. And then there are just like a few gems that happen along the way, where if your head's so deep in your own thought, you actually don't see the good stuff that's happening, because you can get really caught up in that. But I think intellectually and that loneliness is probably the biggest struggle, because the actual research that I was doing, I loved it. I really, really loved it. But what I couldn't do was step away from it. Like, it actually became me, and it was all I was. And that's something we'll get into after, like, talking about the PhD. But after it was my hardest, probably one of the biggest struggles in my life, was like finishing it, because then I felt like I eroded. Like I was gone, because my PhD was me. And then I got rid of it, and I'm like, what do I do now? Who am I?
Yeah, it's so hard, and I resonate with that so much because I had the same when I was going through my journey. I was the only one of my students, my supervisor, my topic. One of my supervisors didn't agree with it, so that was always a
Right.
challenge. And then, like you said, when you finish it and you submit, you're like, okay, cool. I've lived this journey for 3 years. It's what I eat, breathe, sleep, think about. Now what? Who am I? What is this? This is so crazy. And yeah, I'd love to know how you then. So you have your identity as your PhD, Troy, the PhD student who's doing this year, and then that. Okay, you've got it now. Now what happens? Now you're just Dr. Troy. Wow, now what happens? Because everyone thinks it's like the old adage. When you climb a mountain, you get to the top, and oh damn, there's another mountain to climb. So when you're doing your undergrad, you go, I've got my honors. Then honors, I've got my masters. I've got master, my PhD. Then you go, I've got my PhD. Oh, the world is going to open up. Oh, it doesn't actually open up. It doesn't open up. Oh, now what happens? How was that for you? So you graduate, you walk down the street, then boom, things change.
Yeah, well, even that, I've spoken about it a little bit, but I think I'll go through. I had a horrible time getting my PhD across the line because I submitted well on time. Like I was actually about 2 weeks earlier than my submission date. That was all good. And then I was waiting for my 3 reports. So just for the listeners, after you go through, you submit your PhD, you think that's all done, but actually there's a process where you submit it, it gets marked. You then have to do an oral defense. So you meet with your markers or your examiners, and then you chat back to them just about a few things that they have in terms of their report. And then they'll say you either go and do this, or they'll give you the okay, looks great, and then you can finish it, and then you're done, and then you can graduate, and you're officially a doctor after that point. I was waiting for three reports that took about 6 months. 2 got back within the month. 1 just said it was submitted but didn't, and then that was a really long process waiting for them. Then I missed the first graduation because I didn't have my reports back in time. And I was like, that's annoying because I really needed to get that so that I could get employed for this other thing. And then we ended up just getting rid of that report altogether. So I'm just like, so we didn't even need it. We've been waiting this whole time. I missed out on that. And then I had one. So my PhD is in physical activity, and we were very specific that it's only physical activity, Pacific communities, and in the Cook Islands. We clearly stated there was nothing to do with nutrition whatsoever. We're not nutritionists. That was a huge limitation of the study. That's fine. They said it's flawless. Great. But one of my examiners was very nutrition heavy and wanted a nutrition section. And I think I was a bit too, I think it was because of my conduct when I was in my examination where I pushed back on it quite a bit. And then it's not usual that it goes back to the examiners, where usually just your convener will get your changes and then say, yeah, that looks fine. He asked for it back and just delayed it. So I missed the next graduation. And then it ended up being an entire year to the day that I submitted, and then I ended up graduating a year after. So I was over it at that point. So you finish your PhD, you're like, yeah, this is great. But because I went into academia, having that process for me was the best thing that could have happened, because I just know this is what it's going to be like. You have, when you're submitting papers, when you're publishing, all that sort of stuff, it's a bunch of people who have subjective thoughts on what is the proper thing to come through here. So your papers could be great. You could send it to 10 people. They all say, this is phenomenal, man. This is Nobel Prize right here. Then you get one examiner who, didn't eat their breakfast that morning, under stress, reads it, trash. No, don't like it. So it's just like that. And that's the world of academia. And I got to experience it as my first thing coming out. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I think I'm ready for this.
And that's so crazy. I have to say kudos to you, because I had the exact same experience with my PhD, but I wasn't like you. I gave up. I was like, this is ridiculous. I can't. I had no one on my side battling with me. So I had the same thing. I had 2 reports that came back straight away. One was flawless, happy days, which I was like, oh, this is interesting, because I was like, I'm sure there's spelling mistakes, but that's okay. one was minor changes, and I expect, and the other one was a whole, and I was like, holy! But it came back to me 8 months later. A bit like you. I submitted, and then I was like, and by that time my head had moved on, and I'm sure your head would have moved on in a different space. And one of my supervisors didn't back me up, and that was it. And I just said, I can't do this battle here. And so I just moved on. So I always regret that, because I would have, like you, I should have just taken it to them and been like, but I had moved on to another job. I had and I was like, it's like, oh shit. So it's pretty crazy that one person in academia, one person can dictate how your life just goes, and that's quite scary, and that's one of the things that I find really challenging in academia, and you find the same thing as when you submit articles to get published. You go and then you get one person going, actually, you spelled this wrong, you said this wrong, so I disagree with you. And you're like, oh, what?
Yeah.
It's so crazy. So Tony, you got to look forward to that there. This is great.
Exciting times ahead.
Yeah. But hey, so I hats off to you for fighting that battle there and getting to where you are, because it is quite a challenge, especially like you said, when it's a lonely road and you have to just, your own conviction just pushes you through. Well, hopefully, yeah.
For sure, yeah. And then after that is when I was pretty lucky, because I was kind of getting lined up. So I started looking at opportunities for employment after it, and it just happened so that one of the guys that I work with now, he's like one of the only Pacific statisticians, like one of very few Pacific statisticians. And he was just like, I've got a project, I've got full funding, and we're looking for a research fellow. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. And then like what I didn't know was that he was saying, hey, can you be my research fellow next year? So I was very lucky to have walked into that. But we had published a paper together looking at quantitative, like using Pacific methodology in quantitative research. So that's where I got into big data after that point. So I think that was an unreal experience as well, because I don't know if you would have had it probably during your PhD experience or just most postgrads, that it's not a good sell. I think like the marketing of it is so horrible. You're just like, hey, you come in, it's a lonely road, so hard. Oh my gosh, I don't know why you'd want to do this. Oh, how employable are you? Not very. And then they're telling you that, and then they're like, oh, it's the last 6 months. You could get bursary. We're gonna have a workshop on how to be employed because you're not very employable. And you're like, what? Why do I even sign up for this? This is
so crazy, right? It's a negative selling point but at the start they're like, yeah, this is great, this is awesome for you, and then the last 6 months, like, by the way, just kidding, we got you in. That's cool. So you've done that, you did that there, awesome. And then what is the impact for you as you started going to your community? Because all your work is in the community. Now you've got this, and now you're a leader in the field, which changes the whole story.
And that's the stuff that drives you. That's the stuff where, like, no matter the negative stuff that comes up, unless the negative stuff is from the people you're trying to help, unless they're telling you, no, don't do that. Like you just like, well, I need to go on somehow because those are the people who are going to be impacted in the end. And this is something that shapes a lot of my philosophy on my career, is like, it's not about your loyalty to institutions. It's not about, your obligations to that sort of stuff, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if they're from another institution, but they're still working with Pacific communities. You have the same goal. So yeah, I don't mind about crossing ties and anything like that. And that's my entire philosophy, because everything that we want to do is so that we can help them. And that's because I'm from there. I'm from like the community. I've been in the community, and I've just worked my way out. And without them, I wouldn't have seen that this is a good idea. I wouldn't have seen that I'm actually someone who's capable of doing this. And they're the best people to go back to, because they remind you of when you're moving away from your values. They're the first to roast you as soon as you step away from like everything that you said you would be about. So like being able to go back, like I got to go home to the Cook Islands to do 1 year of my research. And all of my consultations. So before I actually started my PhD, I spent maybe like a year or two just chatting with different people about how I should go about this. This is what I want to do. This is my idea. And they shaped a lot of it. They ended up pretty much creating my project for me. And we were just like going back and forth. And then being able to go back and actually deliver it. Because every time I would go back or come here, they'd always be like, when are we going to start? When are we going to start? So like having that is the most fulfilling feeling. And then going back after it's all done, and then them just being like, oh, it's so good to see you. And nothing's changed. Like, yes, I'm a doctor now, but like you go back and you're still doing the dishes. You're still taking the rubbish out, still doing all that. And it's like, that's nice, because you know that it's having a positive impact. And then like you can get the verbal stuff of people saying to you, oh, wow, this is really helping. But then also just seeing things live on. So seeing things like actually have a positive impact and seeing it as part of their weekly routine is the most fulfilling thing. And that's why, I get into it. And that's why I continue to persevere when it starts to feel like, oh man, this is really not for me. But then I remember, this isn't for me. This wasn't never for me anyway. This was for everyone else that I was serving.
Yeah, and it's so crazy. That's, we always hear the cliche, what's your why? But it's very important. The why is what drives us in most things in our life. And if we don't have a strong why, or we don't remember that, then we just stop, or we just give up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's awesome that you've done that then. So you do this here, but now let's take a bit of a divergence. So Troy the academic, Troy the athlete, but let's talk about Troy the podcaster. What was the driver to start a podcast?
Yeah, cool. So I when was this? This was my last year of my PhD. So it was just before, when I was in Raro, so 2019, I was chatting with one of my friends over there. He owns a gym, and he was just saying, like, we should get into the podcasting game, because like there's just, how many conversations you have, like every single person every day has awesome conversations with a lot of people, and you're just like, I think everyone's probably been in a conversation now where you've just been in like the most in-depth conversation. You explored so many different rows, and you're like, imagine if we recorded that. And then I just like, we should just record it. So that's what we ended up doing. And it was like another thing, because I'm very open about, going to counseling and getting help for different things and just mentorship. And then I realized like that's an avenue that a lot of people don't have access to. So I was like, well, what if I just get some of my learnings from there, package it, because I'd like to do a summary of what I've learned in counseling that week or whatever week that I do it, package it, and then end up putting it out as content, so that people who don't go or don't like listening to the stuff that's out there, and maybe someone who's a little bit more relatable, maybe, can listen to it. And then that's kind of where it started. We're just like, let's talk about the things that we've learned this week. And then we'll put that out. And then it ended up just getting, I think it was really good timing though, because we kind of peaked around the time that everyone was in lockdown and everyone was listening to a lot of podcasts right then. So yeah, that's how it started. And then how it evolved was just like, oh, we can do this. And having a bit of time to be able to put some energy into it. And then it kind of just got to a point where I was like, oh, I feel like I can't stop now. That's how it all happened.
Yeah, it's crazy. And tell us about the name. How did you choose the name?
So that was, I was coming up with a little jingle for the start, and I was just like, I sent through like a voice thing to my co-host at the time. I just sent it to him. I was just like, hey, like what we'll do is I'll say, kia ora, I'm Troy, and then you say like, I'm Tyler, and I'll say, and you're listening to, and we didn't have a name at the time, and I was like, and you're listening to this sick ass podcast. Like it was just a joke. It was more just me being like, so that's a gap filler. And then we're just like, oh, we should just do it. So I like typed it in everywhere. I was like, sick ass podcast, and like the sick ass podcast. I just kept typing it in, make sure there was no other sick ass podcast. Yeah. Then we did it.
And boom. It's so crazy how that happens, hey? So crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And so when I listen to your podcast, I really appreciate the when you talk about your packages, like you say, and I really appreciate that. But when you do it, are you aware? Is it? It's something that when you go through the process, are you thinking about, okay, cool, I can talk about it in a podcast, or does it happen afterwards? So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, when you go through your counseling, and once you happen, and once you're going through, are you going, cool, this is good for my podcast, or you're just in the moment of your counseling, you think about your lens, and you come back?
Yeah, no. It's so usually it'll probably be like a month or so after that. So like, because I go fairly regularly, yes. I've got like things that once I figure it out, like, okay, that's what I'll do, and this is how I've implemented it, rather than just being, because what I didn't want to do is put out all of this, information. This is great information, but not be doing it. Yep. So I wanted to make sure that I'd had a couple of weeks of trying to implement that. And if I haven't implemented it yet, then I won't release it. It's only like a click away or a photo away or a video away from someone just discrediting you because you've gone and done that. But that's not what I do it for. It's more just so I can keep myself accountable and can actually do that stuff that makes me feel good, or the stuff that I've actually spoken about. And I find that talking it out, finally being able to put it out there for everyone, it's actually more for myself. As selfish as that sounds, a lot of it is like, maybe I haven't quite got this right, but when I'm speaking to it, like, if you listen to it, it's the hugest tangent of all time. All it is like, I have an idea, then something comes up, like I see a fridge for sale, and I start talking about fridges, then I'll come back again. And it's just how my mind works. So I think it's quite therapeutic for myself as well. But yeah, like I said, I'm in the moment when I'm learning about anything. And then once I feel like I've got a good grasp of it, because I've actually lived it out for a bit, done a bit of journaling on it, and actually spoken through it with myself, then I can be like, okay, I can record this now.
Which is very cool because, like you say, a podcast is like a conversation, and any conversation is going to tangents, fridges or the sky or whatever. And when you try, I find, well, actually, we both find when you start structuring it, because at the start we were very structured. Okay, so we're going to talk about didn't blow. It didn't blow jam. We're gonna change this quite a bit. So yeah, so I really respect the way you've done that. So we've got that there, but what about Troy the athlete? So you've got Troy the academic, Troy the podcaster, then Troy the athlete. There's more to Troy than this here, but let's Troy the athlete. What is your jam there? Because I've seen in your podcast on Instagram, you show us your time in the gym.
Yep. Yeah. So I've always been an athletic kid. I've just always been outside. I don't think it was because I loved sport. I think it was more just because I hated being at home. Like we were those, back in the days, Tanya, you might not know this, but we used to, go outside and it's just kidding. But we, a lot of our time was how long can we stay outside for so that we don't have to come home and, not having phones, not having anything like that. So believe it or not, I was a competitive skateboarder for a little bit. So I used to compete in skateboarding. I started when I was about 9, and I'd competed maybe from like 12 to 14, 15. And then it just got to a point where I was just getting so banged up from that, but I wanted to play rugby. So I was in the Wellington Academy and then came down here and I just gave all rugby away. My body was just pretty messed up and head stuff as well. So I wanted to do well at uni. And then as soon as you have a really bad head injury and you just don't know where you are and you're sensitive to light and you can barely read, which is a fundamental part of what you're meant to do as a student. I was just like, oh, I'll give this a little bit of a break. So in that time, I started competing in CrossFit. And CrossFit was I think I'm so competitive that I was really enjoying at the gym, but I knew that being at the gym, the old classic saying, you're only in competition with yourself, which doesn't drive me enough. I like to be in competition with other people, and there's no better way to do that than to put a time up or to put a score up in CrossFit. So I competed in CrossFit for about 4 years, which is probably the best thing I could have done in terms of maintaining my physical body for my return back into rugby. So playing rugby now, and I think now post PhD, where you actually have work time and then trying to shut off time, because in academia where you can always be working, it's like an assignment. It's always hanging over your head. I could be doing more, but if you have to go to practice, you can't be focusing about that. So I used it as a tool to be able to just take me away from my work. But then I just fell in love with it again. And just play it. And the contact, there's nothing more humbling than just getting beat up, every weekend and being able to put your skills to good use.
Yeah, Tanya, that's so awesome. Tanya, talk a little about that, because you took a break and you come back into it just recently.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the humbling statement. Getting back into league, our team, we're probably the smallest team in the comp, coming up against some massive boys, and so it is a humbling experience, but it's definitely a fun experience as well, and I think the other thing that I've always loved about sport, is there's so many things you can take away from it that you can just put into your own life. The leadership, the teamwork, the being able to just keep going, even though, it can be tough, you can be battling, but you just keep going. And after the game, that's, it's finished. You come off with a lot of respect, not only for the other team, but your own team as well. So it's been really good just to get back into it.
Yeah. And I think it's different from, your intellectual pursuits, where it could take years for people to kind of see oh, okay, I see you got slightly better there. But if you pass it way better, you see it immediately. If you put a kick in that goes well, if you tackle well, you can see week to week improvements, which is always nice. But then if you're just in an office slumped over and you're just oh, this is taking forever, then you send it off, and it's a huge process for someone to get back to you. Having some sort of physical pursuit, I think always is going to yes, cool, I'm getting better. Or yes, I can actually you see a tangible difference or a tangible change almost immediately.
Yeah, and it's real. It's you seeing it yourself versus someone else giving you that, oh, you've actually done well, but you can actually,
absolutely.
I know I kicked that really well. Controversial question. What is your favorite CrossFit WOD?
My favorite CrossFit WOD.
Yeah.
You mean the trademark WOD?
The trademark one.
Okay, right. I think short and sharp was always my jam. So like Fran, which is the 21-15-9 thrusters and pull-ups, that was my jam. I really, really enjoyed that one. Just like, because during it, it's almost probably why I like any sort of workout that you do, where during it you're just so amped and you're like, I could die, but you don't die at the end. And it's so short. It's like, sub 3 minutes if you're getting pretty good. And then after it, there's like 1 whole hour of you not knowing where you are. And it's just like, I pushed myself there. That's awesome. But yeah, anything that goes longer than about 6 minutes, I just hated it. So
Oh wow! So you're not like Murphy's my jam. I love Murph. I can keep going with Murph and Murph and Murph. Give me Murph galore.
I mean, it's great. It's great during it, but like the week after is horrible. You're just like, your hands are ripped, your triceps are just gone, and then like your legs feel like cement, which is also quite nice as well.
It's quite nice. I don't know. I'm a word weirdo. I love every time there's Murph. I'm like, yeah, bring it on. I love Murph. It's just for me, it's my mind. It's just your mind. This is your mind. Especially
that is a
those
cool
big
thing.
numbers. Those big numbers there. So now that you've started the podcast, what is the you have some amazing guests on your podcast. How do you decide your guests?
Okay, so this I get people who ask me, as well as I'll see people who I'll talk to people. Pretty much how it happened, and you've probably gone through this as well, where like you'll have people at the beginning who you're just like, I know they'll say yes. Yeah. Because you don't back yourself. You're like, oh, like it's a podcast. Does anyone even know what a podcast is? We're lucky now because podcasts are a bit more, everyone's got a podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Or people listen to podcasts. So you don't have to explain what it is anymore. I remember like the early days, they're like, a podcast, is that like a TV show? Like, kind of like a radio show, but it's not live. But anyway, so that was the first. And I just got my friends because it was easy. I knew they'd say yes. And I knew how I could talk to them because I wasn't sure how I was as a conversationalist at the time. And then after that, once I think I had like maybe 10 or 15 interviews when I started to feel confident. Okay, people have seen this now. It's out there. And I can say, I've had these guests on. And then after that, everyone kind of just reference someone else.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, hey, these 3 people. So for example, having 3 different fighters on, and then they all talk about another fighter. I'm like, well, I should probably go talk to that person as well. And then other people were just like, you should talk to. So as soon as you finish, they're just like, oh, have you ever considered talking to this person? Yeah. And then that's kind of how the whole thing went. Is just, I had guests on, and then sometimes, energy wise, you don't feel like getting a guest on, and you just want to talk by yourself. So that's how it happened. And I probably should put in a bit more effort to this whole thing, but it just happens to be working at the moment. So
it just flows, yeah. It just flows, right? It just happens, which is pretty cool. I want to also ask you about the mental health part of your journey, because that's part of your story. When did that all start for you? When did you go, actually, I need to explore this part of my life? Was there a moment that happened, or was it
It's a couple of things. I think I was very aware of it. I remember my first, being in my first counseling sessions when I was about 8 or 9. And, my parents were going through their separation. And then I remember my dad was very open to me about what stress is, what depression is. I think it was more just because I grew up with him in that stage where they separated. And, I got to see the effects of what being a solo parent could do. And he was very open with me about it. And I was like, well, you don't know any different at the time. So, I was going to his counseling sessions with him, all that stuff. And then just hearing the word stress, hearing the words depression, hearing the words, all of that stuff. And then, so I was like, okay, well, there's that. All through my teen years, I was just angry. I was so angry at a lot of things. I'd just be triggered so quickly. And then I just started seeing that I was taking it into other things where I was very good at being with other people. And then as soon as I was by myself, I just have my mind would just race into oh, you idiot, why'd you say that? Oh, why don't you do this? And just would really beat myself up about it. And then I think it just got to a point where once financial struggles came into it as well, not knowing whether or not I can stay at uni because I couldn't, pay rent the next couple of months. I was like, okay, this is bad. Where you start thinking it's easier to quit something, whether that be, what you're studying right now, or even to the extent of thinking about, ending life. That sort of stuff is oh, I need to do something because this is too much. And sometimes you just need someone to talk to without feeling like you're burdening them, because that was another thing I was very aware of, is like, I was always like, why would I want to talk to my friends? They don't want to hear this side of me. They like the fun side of me. So I just like, this was the easiest way for me to like differentiate between being that person. And then it got to a point where I've actually never told this. When I think I was like about to do a master's, it got to a point where I was like, I think my uncle passed away and my dad was having heart complications. And I just remember texting one of my mentors, being like, I don't know what to do. I just feel like every week when I'm doing this, like I'm getting further and further away from like actually being able to complete this. And then I was just like, okay, so I deferred my master's. I just said, I can't do this anymore. So that ended up having to go. And then I went to regular counseling from there. So I was about 22, 21 at the time. And then from there, I was just like, well, this is what I need to keep doing. Otherwise, I just, get back into that pit again. So that's how it got to a point where it was just really, really bad. And then I was like, I need to do something about this or it can get very bad.
Yeah, totally. And I love the way you mentioned that, because, a lot of us say, oh, we'll just talk to our friends. And when you talk to your friends, they get burdened, and that just creates another situation. But there's a whole stigma around counseling. Oh, that's changing at the moment, which is really, really cool. And how did that, this is going to be a terrible word, but I guess being brought up in the world was easier for you. But suppose somebody else who has never experienced counseling before, and there's a stigma about, oh, go to a counselor. What would you say to them?
So how I try to open, it's just like anything. Like, even if you don't feel like you need it at the moment, it's just like, I think the vocabulary around like how you're struggling and knowing that any struggle is still a struggle. I think that's one thing, is like a lot of people don't feel like they should go to counseling, or they don't qualify for counseling. They're like, because, I've never had these thoughts before, or that, like, a lot of comparison between your struggle and struggles that you've heard of other people. And I think the first one is actually knowing how to access a counselor. It was very difficult for the first little bit, because the counselors that I was being given, either shared an office with people that I knew, like we're in the same building. So I'm just like, oh, what the heck? I don't want them to know. Or they like had a direct link to someone else that I had known. And I know that they'll be super professional, but there is like a part of you that shuts off and just makes sure you don't say certain things because you're worried that that's going to happen. I think another one would be like the financial side of it as well, to being able to go get that. But like, there's so many avenues now. And just, to know, like, you service your car. Not many people do this, but you do that so that long term it doesn't break down. There might not be anything rattling. You might not have a check engine light on or anything like that. But, if you do this now, those things will never occur. And I think it's just knowing that it's regular servicing of yourself, to check in with yourself, to make sure that everything is okay before it even gets bad. Like, I still go when I feel like everything's great, because I want to know how I can harness this. Or if out of the blue something does happen, and then I just like, oh, what? You were feeling great. How did this happen? You already know. You've got things to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that's a great analogy there, because a lot of us don't do that. We look after all the physical material things in our lives, but what about the number one physical thing?
Yeah,
we also don't do that there, right? And yes, we might go to the gym, we might eat healthy, but there's also this is probably the most powerful tool that either goes or doesn't go. And it's really quite scary, because this can just switch in an instant.
Absolutely.
An instant. And like you said before, if you don't know what the trigger is, that's when the spiral starts.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry. Just really quick. Just on that, you when you said that, like, it just clicked on in my head. There's a new model out. So the person who came up with the Funofale model, him and another person came up with a new mental health model where, like, I don't know it in depth, but what I do remember is that there are 3 strains that go through it, that weave it all together. And it's like a plait, you have 3 different strands that are in that plait. One was red, one was yellow, one was green. And one's like, so green being like positive mental health, you've got that all, then yellow being like, oh, so, and then red being really bad. And what they've said is that, like, all of your journey is all 3 of them interweaved, where like, you're going to have aspects of each of them in every day and every moment. And at different moments, it's going to switch, and acknowledging that part of it as well. So you're so right. Like, you could feel so on top of the world, and then like just something happens and bam, you've switched. And it's probably because it's always been there. but it hasn't been front of mind because all the other stuff that's happening. So yeah, I mean, all of it is on a continuum all the time, but they're all existing at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive in terms of having good mental health or bad mental health. It's just all existing at once, but whatever comes to the fore is what's going to be kind of like the truth at that moment. So yeah, that was a good point.
100%, because I went to mental health training with St. John's a few weeks ago, and they said the exact same thing. Okay, we all have mental health. Mental health is part of our lives, but unfortunately, when people speak of mental health, it's a negative connotation. Oh, mental health. Like, wait a minute, but like you said, we're on a continuum. You know, this morning I could be over here, amazingly fantastic, and then after this conversation, but I should have said that, and then go over here, overthinking things. So, but it's important for us to say it out there for people to go, actually, wait, it's not a bad thing, and it's just a thing. And then it's just where we're on that thing. It's a bit like good and bad. I don't believe there's a good or bad decision. There's a decision you make, and then
absolutely
what happens after that is what happens after that. Then, and Tana, I guess you've had to go through a few challenges recently with things happening in your life. How did that affect you, I guess?
Yeah, I think it has been quite a challenge, and that's where probably my first thing is usually I go to mum and dad, and mum specifically. Usually that's my first grounding point, just to make sure everything's all right and in check. But that's something I have faced, had faced challenges in the past, and that's something where I probably should, have gone to a counsellor a few more times than I have in the past. But that's something that I reflect on and, probably should take advantage of. And as Troy says, you don't have to go thinking that you're going to share your whole life story or that everything's going to be fixed in one session, but just being able to talk about the things that you think are important during that session is probably the biggest thing that we don't do with our friends, because we don't want to burden them.
Yeah.
And also fear of judgment. Yeah, fear of judgment, right? We have the fear. Sorry, Troy.
Yeah. No, like I was going to touch on that as well, like that judgment, but also the just feeling like the being able to delay that gratification as well. Like I do think the expectations of anything that we do is like, this is going to be immediate. I'm going to go there and then I'm going to come out. I'm going to feel like $1 million. To be honest, those first couple of sessions, you kind of feel a little bit more on the lower side because you've uncovered so much. But like, it's like anything, you kind of need that to start the healing process. And I think it is a healing process, and you have to go through a bunch of things and just expose that stuff to yourself to be able to get to the proper root of everything. Because I think we do treat the symptoms really well. Like we can see, okay, this isn't going well, I'll do this. People go, what's it called? Retail therapy, all that sort of stuff. It makes you feel good in the moment, but in terms of actually getting a stronger foundation for you to have a proper relationship with yourself, that stuff is kind of missed. Maybe you could you could put on that cool whatever it is that you bought for the moment, feel cool for like 5 minutes, and then you're on to the next thing. Well, what do I actually need to feel even better? And some of it is actually those things, is going in, having the deep conversations, understanding why you are the way that you are, which sounds really scary and esoteric sometimes, but I do think if you kind of fall in love with that process of just developing, in most instances, you do start to have a lot of compassion for yourself, but then you also become a really good role model or compassionate person towards other people as well, for sure.
Yeah, and sometimes our daily practices help doing that. What are your daily practices, Try to help you with this journaling, meditation? What do you do?
I have to move. I have to get out and do some sort of movement. And that's changed. I used to be very big into like just going to the gym. And what I found out recently is that the gym's actually quite boring. 40 minutes max, I'm in there and I'm out, because I'd rather be outside doing stuff, even if it's raining. To feel the environment is one of my favorite things. And just, walking, we have plenty of walks around here, and just being outside, that's a daily practice that I will not negotiate. And even if I'm at work sitting at my desk for a while, I'm very aware of if I've been sitting too much, and all I do is just like go out and go around the block. It's not huge, but it's something, and it gets me outside, it gets me away from my desk. And so those are things. Having music time as well, like music time. Funny, I actually don't listen to podcasts regularly. I find that I then start comparing it to my own podcast, and I'm just like, no, I needed to do this. Oh, I should do this. And then it's just like, it's a bit of a cascading thing here. But just having time set aside for music, like time to just idle and do less. And that's like, I don't care what I'm doing in that. It could be just laying there. It could be like, I give myself a little bit of scrolling time as well. But mostly just like doing nothing, or setting time aside to like listen to music that I love listening to, or just being by myself, or being with friends or something. and knowing that that's okay. I think that's the biggest thing, is more like not necessarily what I'm doing, but the mentality that I have when I am doing those things. I used to absolutely beat myself up for having that time to myself and being like, you should have been doing this, you should have been doing this, like you could be more productive. But then I'm like, productive for who? Like, who is this actually serving? Because I'm getting burnt out here. So just realizing that part, and whether it is just listening to music, reading a book, talking with friends or anything like that, I've given myself that time and giving myself that grace. And then if it goes an extra half an hour because it's a great conversation, being okay with that. So those are the daily things that I do. I definitely have to move, and then definitely have to set aside time for myself to be able to do the stuff that I want to do.
And that's awesome. And I think, one of the key things there was just being present in that time. When you go for a walk, just being present in the walk, listen to music, being present in that time there. And like you said, we could go for a walk, but our mind's going to be on our work, or it's going to be on, oh, I should have said that. But if you just go, hey, I'm out here in the rain, feeling the rain, that's all good, and that's very hard for us to do. I mean, it takes training to do that,
Yeah.
Like you said, it doesn't happen overnight to go, I'm going to go for a walk today, it's raining, I changed my mind. But I believe in the whole compound effect, even if you walk for 5 minutes, then 6 minutes, then 7 minutes, but easy to say, hard to do.
Yeah. And I just had questions for you to, like, when you, wow, man, having a podcast, like being able to plug your podcast, when people say to me, oh, he's the guy of the podcast, I'm like, no, I don't. That's not me. I don't know what you're talking about. And then other people do go and listen to it, and they do know about it. Has that been weird? I mean, you both of you in different realms, but also, you have colleagues. Tani, even for you, you're with students all the time. And, we all know at about that age, people are so judgmental and they say some stuff. And what has it been like walking around, knowing that there are people who are probably going to walk past you and be like, those are baskets of knowledge, dude,
Yeah, Tana, you go ahead, because you're more into it than I am at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. Like I do have quite a few friends, and I try and plug it, but it's kind of one of those things where it's still like a stigma around, like, oh, you shouldn't be you shouldn't be blowing your own trumpet kind of thing. And it's kind of like, well, there's only so many ways that we can get this podcast out, and so trying to share that message and trying to make it normal, because it's always like, this is what we wanted to do, and this is the message we want to share, so of course I'm going to share it. But it is a weird feeling, and like the first time that someone came up to me and was like, oh, you're on the podcast, it was a surreal feeling, because you never think that's going to happen. But it's also a cool experience, because this is what we want. This is the journey we wanted to go on. So it is, very cool.
Yeah, and I'm going to pull up there. I think for me the hardest thing has been your university colleagues. I think that's the hardest one, because they see it as, oh, why are you doing that? Who are you to talk to other people? And when I post on my LinkedIn, I'm always aware of, I have a lot of university colleagues that are on my LinkedIn, and I'm always mindful. Well, I used to be very mindful what they would think about it, and some of them have commented back going, hey, you shouldn't be doing that there. But they're not, because it's really hard for my role, because this is not about the university experience, it's about a person's experience. And people find it hard to differentiate. They go, are you the Otago person? Why are you talking to a Vic person or a Auckland person? But I'm like, it doesn't matter. I'm not talking about their Auckland journey, or I'm talking about Auckland. I'm talking about the story that they have gone through to get to where they are. Yeah. And that has been my biggest challenge, because when you see me, you see Otago, sadly. But conversely, in the schools, because I plug it in the schools, because I think there's so much gold with everyone's journey. And in the schools, it's a very different story. And different podcasts resonate with me. And I'll say to someone like, hey, listen to Troy's story, because this is. I meet a young person. It's like, hey, listen to this is going to resonate with you. Or someone who is international students, like, hey, listen to Tiara's story, because she went through the same thing that you went through. Listen to Melissa's story. She had a crazy life, but look where she's right now. So those are, for me, it's the stories that I can then share with these young people, and then they come back and they go, oh, that actually resonated with me. Because you just pick and choose. Because we had some amazing people that have some amazing stories. When Ethan spoke about his story, we just normalize mental health and go, hey, this is what mental health for young men are. So when I do the plug, every school knows about it now. I just plug it into schools, but my colleagues are the ones that I guess are my biggest barrier.
Yeah,
that makes sense. And
sorry, carry on.
And one of the things that I've said to Tanya is, like, I would love for us to be profiled in the bulletin, but I'm afraid of what the backlash of that's going to be. There's that double-sided thing, and I'm guessing you have the same thing as well in your environment.
I was just about to say the same thing. I could happily plug it to a bunch of people who don't have to see me every day. Like, I will just get out there. I'm like, yeah, I got a podcast and this is me, but because they don't know me, and they're just like, oh, this guy's the podcast guy. Yeah. But with my colleagues, especially starting it when I was just like a guy who didn't have a podcast to then having a podcast and being the podcast guy, a lot of people like, oh, that's, he does this, he does this. And there were, a lot of people were very supportive, but you do get, and it's weird how you don't listen to the 95% of people who are just like, heck yeah, let's keep going. This is neat. I liked your episode on this. You always like that 1% of people who are like, oh, that's weird that you have a podcast. And you're like, it is weird, isn't it? And then that's the one that's so loud to you. It's always the vocal minority that's just like, oh, well, I guess I have to hang it up now. So that's always an interesting dynamic of who you actually feel comfortable with it being out there. And it's usually like the people who are kind of close, but not your closest, and kind of far away, but not too far away. There's always those people in the middle who know of you, who then for some reason, you're more aware of what they're going to say versus like the people who matter most. So yeah, it's been a weird journey, a very weird time.
It's so crazy, and because I remember when I first met you, Troy, it was like this. This is Troy, the podcast guy, and I was like, oh, this is a really weird introduction. when I met you the very first time, not somebody else introduced you. It's like, this is Troy, he runs a podcast. It's like, that is a very interesting introduction.
Yeah.
Like, who is Troy? So weird. But yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, and with 50 now, so yeah, I remember that discussion. I remember Tanya, we sat down St. Dave's and we had a little chat, and I was like, you could listen to this one, give this one a go, because you were very clear with your intention. And I think it's still the same. Like, I remember at the time it was like going through giving chats about, what people should be aware of when they're applying to university and all that sort of stuff. But now, you've gone to the story mode. And I think this is exactly what happened with me. I had a back and forth chat, I had solo chats, but I didn't have interviews at the time. And was that like a natural progression because you were like, okay, I feel like we should bring other people to bring their stories? Or was it just because you like had a bit more confidence to reach out to people?
I think it was just if I go back to how this all started, this is a great origin story. So when we started, Tane and I have known each other for a very long time, and I'm very, very lucky. So, and I know that Tane has always had an empathy around how people feel and think about things. And I, in my space, I'm like, everyone has got a story, everyone has stories to tell, but how do I tell these stories without jeopardizing my Otago label? Because there's a boundary there. So I couldn't just put up stuff there. And one day Tane said to me, hey, I met this young person who was crying on a field, and she had a story with me, but I shared the fact that this is something that everyone else goes through. And then Tane said to me, hey, I want to start a Facebook page to just talk about people's stories. And at that moment, it's like, hey, Tane, let's forget about the Facebook page. Are you keen to do a podcast? Let's do a podcast together. And I said, I would love to do it, but I don't have the capacity to do all the things. I mean, I'm happily to chat to people, but the other stuff I can't do. As you know, it takes a lot of time and effort to edit things and put things up. And luckily, Tana said yes. And then we said, okay, we're just going to talk about Otago. We're going to talk about Otago and talk about things that Otago, scholarships, accommodation, dates, blah, 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 blah. And then we did that there for the first 3 or so. And then we realized, actually, this is cool, but it's actually not giving anyone any real content unless you're an Otago person. And then I said, hey, Tana, let's just have people let's just talk to people because they have stories. And that's how it all started. And it started, we were like, we're going to talk for 10 minutes. And then we said 20 minutes. And then now it's just exploded to however long.
I was exactly the same. I think there's just like that initial belief of knowing that, you're like, oh, people, maybe this because I know this, because I'm comfortable with this. And you're like, maybe this. And then like, you just start getting more and more like, oh, we could do this, we could do that. And I think that like unlocking that potential of yourself and just seeing that and just getting to a point where like you're like, oh, we can just do this, that'd be fun. Oh yeah, we can, how about we look at that? That's when you start knowing like, oh, okay, I was meant to do this is great.
Yes. And I guess I don't know whether you felt the same thing as well, because as you started doing it, people started getting more excited to be on the podcast. We're like, okay, cool, let's invite Bob. And they were like, oh, we're excited. I was like, wow. And then they share with all their friends. They're like, oh, I guess I was on a podcast. I was like, but it's just Tani and me,
Yeah, because you would have got it. The first couple of people you either messaged or chatted to, the first, I'm interested to hear what your like the responses were. Like, hey, we had this podcast. I was wondering if you would like to come on. Like, what were the main things, like responses you would get when you would ask people at the earlier stages?
The early stage would be like, oh, we've got no time, or or what do you have your podcast? What's your podcast about? There would be lots of questions about it. And then it's all disappeared as they started to see the podcast, because now we show them it's the podcast, and then they get jumped on. But some are still pretty shy. They're like, no, I've got nothing to say.
That part was always the one that hurts me. I'm like, what do you mean? You have so much to say, like everything that you've been through. You could tell me about your entire day, and that's a podcast episode in itself. I think when we start changing that narrative around, what is podcast worthy, what is story worthy, because everyone's stuff that they share, that they've learned, I was just like, that's so deep, that's so insightful, but because you live it every day, you don't think it's important. But you give people that platform to be able to share that, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey, and the ones that say they have nothing to share are the ones that share the most.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
so crazy. So crazy. Yeah, no, it's been quite a journey, and it's I said to Tane, there was like, oh, we've got no guests coming. I was like, God, we have to keep going. We have to just keep, because it's very easy for us to lose momentum. When you miss a few weeks, okay, cool. Now it's a bit like anything in life. When you stop doing things, you go, oh, maybe next week, and then it doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, we've just got to keep going. We just got to keep finding people, and even if we don't find anybody, we're gonna talk. We're just gonna get and just talk. Yeah. Yeah. So it's been fun.
Awesome. That is very good. And I think, just it is exciting. And I think as long as you stay on top of it and just keep pushing, because I know I've had it multiple times where I'm like, I don't even want to do this anymore. And then I just like drag myself in to do it, or do a solo, or do an interview. And then after it, I always feel so much better. I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. I actually do love doing this. I'm just stressed right now. And that was actually a really good outlet. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll be honest. This morning I was like, oh, I don't feel like. And then once you're in, you're like, oh, this is amazing. This is so. Why you do it, right? So, we could keep chatting forever. We've been speaking for 90 minutes, and I know Tana's going to disappear soon. So we're gonna.
Oh, right.
which is fantastic. But before we go, all our guests get asked this question, and all of them have said this is one of the hardest questions they get asked, so which is why we love it. Our podcast, as you know, is called Baskets of Knowledge. And we'd love for you, Troy, to share some piece of knowledge that people could take into their basket as they live their lives every day. Something from your world, something that's resonated with you.
I think my one is really being true to everything that you know. So everything that you carry with you, it was like what I was saying before, with your story, with everything that you carry with you, has so much richness because you've experienced it. Your cultural capital, your social capital, everything that makes you is unique. And the more we start to believe that within ourselves, we know we can take that into different spaces. So mine was a bit more, it's you see it more because I brought Pacific knowledge into science, and I made it a central part of my PhD. There was a lot of backlash. There was a lot of people saying, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. But what they didn't know was that I could do that. Science maybe couldn't do it, but I could do it because I had grown up with it. This was me. I have the community to back me to be able to do that. So everything that's part of you, everything that makes you unique. And that's all amazing stuff. And I think it's going to be more and more normal for you to bring that part of you to any circle that you go into. Not having to leave as much of yourself at the door anymore to be able to fit whatever mold, whatever stereotype, or whatever is the norm, I guess, in that sort of space. So I think that's the knowledge that I carry. I managed to do it. I managed to make a career out of it in terms of academia, and I continue living by that every day and just remembering that there are a bunch of people who went before me who wish they could have had this. And there are a bunch of people who went before me who gave me the knowledge that I do have. So I think leaving that aside is almost like a disservice to a lot of the people who sacrificed a lot for us to be here. So that's always, what I would give out to anyone, and what I hope soon one day will be seen as like, the norm and something that we kind of try to amp up a little bit more. So yeah, no, it's an awesome question.
And that's so powerful because, a lot of the times we live the life for somebody else, not the life that we are. And it's that's such a great learning, and it's a great way for us to wrap up. Tana, anything you'd like to add, say?
I think it's just been awesome to, resonate on how far this journey has come. When we started, it was so small. And as you say, there's been challenges along the way. There's been times where, we haven't got many listens and you start to question, what's the point of doing the podcast? But I think now it's about, we just enjoy having conversations. And if people are willing to listen, then they're willing to listen. And that's been the amazing part. And so, yeah, thanks, Pragesh, for keeping this journey going.
No worries. I'm going to go back, and I know I said this before, but I have to thank you, Troy, for starting this for us. So we wouldn't be here without you. So thank you very much.
Stoked to be part of it, mate. Stoked to be part of it.
Awesome. So this is a great place for us to round up. To our listeners out there, thank you so much for listening. Troy, thank you for jumping on today. I'm sure everybody has found something that's resonated with them in some way or some form. And like we always say, don't forget to find something to put into your basket of knowledge as we get to the next week. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Baskets of Knowledge.
Yeah, we hope that you found something useful to put into your basket of knowledge. And as we said before, remember to put something little into your baskets of knowledge every week. And as always, feel free to like, comment, and share this podcast. Thanks, everybody. Bye.